Hello, this is Leroy Meadows, and welcome to this session. And in this session, we're going to talk about pricing decisions and cost management. So, we're going to take a look at a number of things in this chapter. First of all, we're going to talk about the three major factors that affect pricing decisions. We're going to understand how companies make long-run pricing decisions, and then we'll price products using the target costing approach. We're going to talk about the concepts of cost incurrence and locked-in costs, because there's a difference there. We're going to price products using the cost plus approach. We'll use lifecycle budgeting and costing when making pricing decisions. We'll talk about two pricing practices in which non-cost factors are important. And then finally, we're going to explain the effects of antitrust laws on pricing. So let's go ahead and get started here. Now, how we price a product or services really depends on the demand and supply for it. So what are the three things that influence demand and supply? Well, our customers, our competitors, and our costs. So let's take a look at each one of these three. Customers are going to influence our pricing through the effects of demand for a product or service based on factors such as product features and quality. So, in other words, customers are going to push demand for things that give better features, better quality, and a lower price. So that will force then competitors who have a similar product or service, but chart in features and quality, but have a higher price, that's actually going to try to pull down or restrain pricing there. Another situation is with competitors. Competitors will influence pricing through their technologies, plant capacities, different types of operating strategies, which affect their costs. So every company is different, not just our company, but other people's companies are different in how they're approaching it, what they're looking for as far as profit margins and so forth. So that's going to influence us as well. And may help to either free up a price that we're allowed to charge, or it may help to, or it may force us to restrain pricing. Now, cost influences prices because they affect supply. The lower the cost of producing a product, the greater quantity a firm is willing to make. Example of this would be something that is lower price in nature. If the cost is small, then I can afford to make more of those and then make that more plentiful to the open market. However, if another model, something similar to what we're doing, but it has a lot more bells and whistles, takes a lot more money to make, then we may not want to make quite as many of them because of the cost of investment in creating inventory. Because don't forget that inventory is really a cost that is sitting on our shelves until a product is sold. So the lower the cost of producing a product, the greater quantity I'm willing to supply to my customers and have available versus something that's a lot higher cost. Well, I may not want to keep a lot of supply on there. I may want to keep just enough on hand, which then will constrict supply of that product. So now we're going to talk about short-run pricing and long-term pricing. Last chapter, in the relevant information decision-making chapter, in chapter 11, we dealt a lot with short-run pricing, and when we talk about short-run pricing, we're going to talk about a time horizon of like a year or less. You remember one of the decisions we had to make was one-time only special order, and it had to have no long-run implications, could not affect our clients or our customers, it cannot affect our normal operations. And then what happens in adjusting product mix and output, in a competitive market? We also had situations where we had capacity constraint, and in the short term, we had to focus on which product gave us the highest contribution margin per unit of constraint. So things like that. Last chapter, we dealt with a lot of short-run pricing decisions. In some long-term, but a lot of short-run pricing decisions. Now, this chapter here, we're going to look at pretty much the long-run pricing strategy. And when we're talking about long-run pricing, we're talking about strategies designed to build long-term relationships with customers based on stable price and predicted prices. Why is that? because if we can get a long-term customer and build a long-term relationship, then that benefits our business because that reduces uncertainty. We have a reliable client, we have a steady client base, they'll keep coming back to us. On our end, as a as a manufacturer or a company providing services, that stability of client base is going to be really helpful in making decisions. From the client's perspective or the customer's perspective, a stable price is desirable because it reduces the need for continuous monitoring of prices, and it improves the long run relationship from the buyer's point of view with the seller. So when managers have a stable price as far as our customers, they are happy because they don't have to keep monitoring it and they can focus their energies elsewhere. So when we're looking at long-term pricing decisions and dealing with cost management, we have to refocus and rethink and recall the indirect costs of a particular object are costs. They're related to the cost object, but remember we cannot trace it economically in an economically feasible manner. So unlike direct costs where we can say, hey, 4 tires, 1 car, 4 tires, next car, 4 tires, the next car. We have these other costs that we cannot trace those costs to a particular cost object, and we call that overhead. So with those costs, since we cannot trace it in an economically feasible manner, they usually represent a large percentage of overall cost that is assigned to cost objects. Now, cost allocations and product profitability analysis are going to affect the products promoted by the company. So then, in order to increase profits, the manager is going to focus on high margin products. So in other words, we're going to look at cost allocations. We're going to look at how we're allocating costs, and that's going to, in part, affect product productivity. So once we do a product profitability analysis, So once we do a product profitability analysis, then we can figure out which products are going to be higher margin because those are the ones I want to emphasize. As a business, we are obligated to our shareholders to increase the profits to them because they are the owners of the company. We are the managers. So it is our job to focus on the higher profits and the higher margin products. Now, let's take a look at the purposes of cost allocation. And there's really 4 reasons why we want to allocate costs. The one is to provide information for an economic decisions. So what's an example of that? Well, we want to decide on the selling price of a product or service, whether we should add a new product or new product feature. So that's one reason why we can allocate costs. We want to motivate managers and other employees. An example of that is to encourage the design of products that are simpler to manufacture, less costly to service. So we want to make them easier on ourselves as possible. Then we want to use the cost allocation to justify costs or compute reimbursement amounts. Now remember, from before, certain government defense contracts, certain government contracts in general, will allow for certain types of costs, such as product costs, design costs, and maybe on occasion research and development costs. But we want to use cost allocation. Why? So we can get a better sense of what a fair price is, so that not only can we know what we can charge someone, but we can also compute reimbursement. And then obviously to measure income and assets. Why? Because we need to cost inventories for reporting to external parties. And then we also have to cost inventories for reporting to tax authorities. So let's take a look at 2 different alternatives in long-run pricing strategies. Now there's really 2 approaches that we could have, and they're kind of like the opposite end of everything, or of each other rather. The market-based approach asks, given what our customers want and how competitors will react to what we do, what price should we charge? The cost-based approach says, given what it costs us to make the product, what price should we charge that will recoup our costs and achieve a target return on investment? So what's the difference between the two? Well, we would typically see in a market-based approach a lot more competition, maybe lower barriers of entry. So we're going to be our prices are going to be restrained because we have other competitors that may be maybe very aggressive in keeping their market share. So with a lot more competition, think of how many different types of staplers are out there, or pencils. Pencils is probably even a better one. You can walk into any store and buy a mechanical pencil or a wood pencil or whatever type of pencil. And they're very cheap. They're not expensive. Why? Because the barriers to entry to making pencils is pretty low. A lot of companies can just call up someone in China and have their suppliers make them pencils under their own brand name, because there's nothing proprietary about a pencil. It's got wood and it's got the lead thing in there, so it's pretty basic on a pencil. A lot of competition, so we're going to know what our customers want, how our competitors react to what we do, and then what price should we charge. So the price is going to be pretty constrained. We'll see a lot of price elasticity to a large degree with market-based approach. And when I talk about price elasticity, that means that people are sensitive to price changes, where if a sudden price increase may sap demand and reduce demand, whereas a price decrease may increase demand for a product or a service that we have. The cost-based approach is, you will see this a lot with higher barrier to entry companies. Things that are more unique, a lot less competition. So these products are going to be a cost-based approach. We're going to take our costs, figure out what we want for a return on investment, and that's going to be our markup component. And then from there, our cost plus our markup component is going to give me my sales price. So now we have to think about, before either approach, we have to understand customers and competitors for three reasons. The first one is lower cost competitors are going to continually restrain prices. For those competitors that are going to keep lowering their costs, they don't require as much of a selling price or as high of a selling price in order to make their profit, and so they're going to continually restrain prices, especially if they think they can get market share away from you or some of their other competitors. Number two is that a lot of products nowadays have shorter lives, so there's less time, less opportunity to recover from a pricing mistake, loss of market share, loss of profitability. And we see this especially a lot in technology type products. The same phone that was popular 4 or 5 years ago, now there's other things that have developed because new products have come out, better products have come out, so that product really has a shorter life. And also because customers are more knowledgeable. And why is that? Because they have access to price, they have access to other information online, and they really want high quality products at lower prices. So we see a lot of, you can go anywhere on the internet and look for pencils, you can look for desks, you can look for laptops. So customers are becoming more knowledgeable because they have easy access to the price and other information online. And since that information is all online, they're going to do a lot of comparison shopping and demand higher quality products at lower prices. Now, with a target costing for target price, it's a market-based approach. We're going to start at a target price, which is going to be the estimated selling price for a product or service that potential customers are going to be willing to pay. So we're going to start off with the price that we think our customers are going to be willing to pay, and that's going to be based on an understanding of what our customers perceive value for a product or service, what kind of value are they going to place in that, and then also how will competitors respond? The competitors that offer competing products or services. So if I'm selling pencils and I'm selling mechanical pencils, if I set a price that's maybe 25 cents, 50 cents a package lower than my competitors, then what are my competitors going to do? Are they going to lower their prices? Are they going to undercut us? So I have to have an understanding of how our competitors will price their competing products, as well as understanding my customers' perceived value for a product or service. Now, when we talk about developing target prices, there's really 4 steps involved in really developing the target price. And let's go to the book here. So give me just one moment here. Let's go to the ebook. And the first thing we want to do is find a product that satisfies the needs of potential customers. And in this situation, ask those managers want to make a low price PC, and they did some market research, and they found that some of their customers don't value some of ProValue's extra features. So they got some feedback. They did some information, some research about the competitors. They got customer feedback, and they're like, okay, we don't, customers are saying, we don't care about this stuff. We don't care about this or that or the other thing. So based on the features that they determined that the customer wants and that their competitors are going to provide, they're going to choose a target price. So in here with Ask Those Managers, they're looking to lower the price of the PCs to the competitor is going to lower the prices to $850. And knowing that, Ask Those Managers want to respond aggressively by reducing the price of ProValue by 20%. Currently it's $1,000, but now they want to reduce it to $800. And at this lower price, the marketing manager forecasts an increase in annual sales from 150 to 200,000 units. So there we see the price elasticity there, that as prices change, demand is going to change. Now let's talk. Now step 3, we're going to drive a target cost per unit by subtracting target operating income per unit from target pricing. So let's look at this section right here, this block right here. So we're going to take our anticipated selling price, in this case $800 per unit, multiply that by the number of units we plan on selling, 200,000 units. That will give me target revenue of 160 million. Now, let's say that my target operating income is 10% of revenue. So 10% of revenue is how much? Well, 10% of 160 million is $16 million. Now, on a per unit basis, I'm going to take that $16 million and divide that by 200,000 units to get $80 of operating profit per unit. So now that I know my sales price or my target sales price, I also know my markup component or my target operating income, $80, I can now compute the target cost per unit. Take my $800 per unit, subtract out my target operating income. So the cost of this new laptop is going to need to be $720 per unit. And what's the total cost of the turn? And so that's where my costs have got to be. My total current full costs are 135 million. Now, if I spread that out over 150 units I'm currently producing, my costs are $900 per unit. So right now, I've got to reduce my cost from $900 per unit to my anticipated new target cost per unit of $720 per unit. So it's about a $180 difference. So that's how we get the target cost per unit. We take our total target revenues, subtract out our operating income to give us our target cost per unit. Now, and then we perform value engineering to achieve target costs. So let's take a look at value engineering for just a moment. Value engineering is just any systematic evaluation of everything that goes on in the value chain. And the object of evaluating all aspects of the value chain is really to reduce costs and achieve a quality level that satisfies customers. If we can do both, if we can satisfy our customers, but then reduce the costs throughout the value chain, then we are heading in the right direction. Now, value engineering also entails improvement in product designs, maybe some changes in material specifications, and maybe even some modifications in the process methods. This way, we can reduce our costs, and in that process, not reduce our quality. So, when we implement value engineering, we have to focus on two different types of activities. If we're going to do value engineering, we're going to look at value-added activities and non-value activities and costs. So let's take a look and define those. A value-added cost that is a cost that, if we eliminated that cost, would reduce the actual or perceived value or usefulness that customers experience from using our product or service. In other words, if we eliminate a specific cost, will our customers be as satisfied with their product? Will our product be as useful to them? If the answer is no, then that's a value-added cost, because that's a cost that is incurred in order to increase usefulness to our customers. A non-value-added costs are costs that, if eliminated, so if we have certain costs that are eliminated, and the customer does not have a reduced actual or perceived usefulness of your product, the customer gains from using the product or service. So, in other words, if this is a cost that, if we eliminated it and our customers don't even notice, then that's a cost we need to actually eliminate and get out of our and reduce and remove from our processes. So, value-added cost, if we eliminate it, customers would not find our product as useful. A non-value-added cost, if we eliminate a cost and the customers don't even blink an eye, or bat an eye, and they don't find your product any less useful, and the product is just as useful as it was before that cost was eliminated, then that was a non-value-added cost. So now we need to focus in here on some other terminology. We have cost incurrence. This is when a resource is actually consumed or a benefit forgone to meet a specific objective. So in other words, a cost incurrence is something that we actually are, a cost that we actually are incurring. We're actually consuming a resource. And we'll look at this in a second and compare it to locked-in costs. And these are costs that have not been incurred yet, but they will be incurred in the future based on decisions that have already been made. So if I make a decision that let's say 6 months from now, I'm going to give all my workers a $3 an hour raise, and I've negotiated that with the union contract is signed. That is a locked-in cost, because I cannot get out of that cost because I've already signed the contract with the union. That's a locked-in future cost. I'm not incurring it yet. When will I incur that cost? I will incur that cost once that new contract goes forward and that those new wages kick in. At that point, I will incur the cost. Up until then, that cost is just locked in, but it's not incurred yet. So when can we best manage costs? Before they're locked in. Because once they're locked in, we really can't change too much of those costs. And here's an illustration for Pro Value. And on the bottom x-axis here, we are going across from left to right the different parts of the value chain functions. Research and development and design, manufacturing, marketing, and then distribution, and finally customer service. So we have the 6 parts of the value chain. Now these costs, and we're going to see 2 different lines here. The upper line right here are locked-in cost curves. These are costs that we are already committed to, even though we don't have to shell out the cash for them yet. The cost incurrence is saying this is when we're actually having to make the payments and actually get a bill or something like that, when we're actually consuming a resource. When are those costs coming due, and when do I have to make payments for those? These costs, these are just future costs. They're locked in, so I can't get out of them, but these are costs I planned for in the future. As the future arrives and and those costs are starting to come due, then that's when I'm incurring the cost. And as you see that across the value chain here, the costs are high, but these costs can be really low. And then as we go through the manufacturing process, as we go across the value chain here, we're going to see our total costs eventually come up and meet with our locked-in costs. So let's just refresh our minds and just summarize the key steps in value engineering. We have to understand customer requirements, and what does the customer want? What do they need? What are they looking for? And then take that and figure out what our value added and non-value added costs are. We need to anticipate how costs are locked in before they are incurred, because again, once they're locked in, we can't go back and change it. Another thing we should do is use cross-functional teams to redesign products and processes to reduce costs while meeting customer needs. We want to reduce those costs. We want to be more profitable while still satisfying customers. Because if the customer is not satisfied, then all that cost reduction may actually drive business away. Now, what can happen under value engineering target costing? Now, if we're not careful, we can have some negative side effects. One is that employees are going to feel frustrated if they don't get the targets. They don't hit the targets. Two, cross-functional teams. I've seen this before. Cross-functional teams may add too many features just to accommodate the different wishes of team members. So basically, in a situation, we have a group of members, some from research and development, some from design, some from marketing, some from production, and everybody comes up with a wish list, and the product the product we're developing will have too many of the wish lists, too many things of the wish list, and then we have too many features, and then we're incurring a lot higher cost than we really should. Also, a product may be in development for a long time because the team can never agree on a plan, on a design, on a path forward. So if no one can make a decision and everybody keeps saying, well, no, I don't know. And, well, let's think about this for a little bit. Then we have an issue where if no one can no one can be in charge and be a leader and make a decision, then products may be in development for way too long of time. And what could happen? Well, if you wait too long, someone else may come to market for you or before you, and then you're not going to have a chance to capitalize on opportunities in the marketplace. Why? Because someone else beat you there. If it's a new product, a new product that has no competition, or maybe you're looking to upgrade and you have competition, but you want to set your product apart so that you can command a little bit higher price. Well, if you wait too long and no one can agree on anything, then someone else may come in and beat you to the punch, and then you've lost your opportunity. You've foregone that opportunity. And then also, what can happen here is that you may have conflicts develop in the organization. One department, mad at another department who's mad at everybody else. Because if cutting costs is falling unequally on different parts of the value chain, then some people feel like, well, they just don't care about us. It can really the company just gutting us so that they can treat these people like, kings and stuff like that, and give this department's favored. They're they're the best, they're the CEO's pet department or whatever, and we're just dog food compared to that. Sometimes it happens. So we have to be careful. If we're going to cut costs, try to cut them strategically, but also communicate. Because as you remember, there's qualitative behavior as well that we have to take into account, qualitative analysis. And if employee morale is going to really sink, we need to think twice about whether we're going to go ahead and do that or not. Now, so how do we avoid those possible undesirable effects? Encourage employee participation, celebrate small improvements, focus on the customer. Because that customer is really the reason why we're in business. So if we don't focus on the customer, then we've really lost our focus as a company. Pay attention to schedules. And then finally, set cost-cutting targets for all value chain functions. So that way everybody is contributing to the cost-cutting targets. And that way the costs are not being unequally burdened on one department, one part of the value chain, etc. Now, let's take a look at cost plus pricing. Cost plus pricing is the opposite of the market-based approach for long-run pricing decisions. It can also be termed cost-based pricing because we're taking the cost of a product, we're adding a markup component, and then we're setting the sales price. So it's really the opposite. Under market-based approach, we're figuring out our sales price, what can we charge, we're subtracting out our desired operating income or profit per unit, and then we're going to get the target cost where we have to be at that cost or under. Cost plus pricing, we're taking the cost of the product first, we're adding a markup component, and then adding the markup component to the cost gives us our sales price. Now, usually it's only a starting point in the price setting process, because markup has got to be somewhat flexible because there are customers that they may not pay an exorbitant amount for our product. So we got to keep that in mind. What are our products willing to pay, and then are our competitors going to catch up to us? And so when we're talking about the cost plus pricing here, the plus is going to be representative of the markup that's added to the cost in order to get our sales price. So we can do that in a couple different ways. We can choose a markup to earn a target rate of return on investment, which is a target annual operating income divided by invested capital. Or we can compute the specific amount of capital invested in a product. Now that's kind of challenging though, because it requires difficult and arbitrary allocations of investment and equipment. So the specific amount of capital invested, it can be challenging to compute. And because of that, we can actually use alternative cost bases to set prospective selling prices, such as variable manufacturing costs, variable costs, manufacturing costs, and full costs across the whole value chain. So let me go here and illustrate where we go back and choose a markup to earn a target rate of return on investment. And let's look at the book for the illustration here. And let's go back here. So in this, let's take a look here. And here's just a simple illustration. If we take that illustration we just used for a market-based approach, so now let's flip it. Let's approach it from a cost plus rate of return or target rate of return on investment. Let's say our cost base, the full unit cost of the Pro Value 2 is $720. We're going to add a markup component. In this case, it's going to be 12% of the cost, the full cost base, which is the full unit cost. So 12% of that 720 is going to be 86.40. So that is my markup component. My prospective selling price then is going to be $806.40. Now, how do we determine that markup component? Well, there's a number of different ways we can do that. In this chapter, we're going to define it as a percentage of invested capital. although we can have other things that we can get a rate of return on or a markup component. We're going to use a rate of return on invested capital. So let's say that the company has invested capital, the money that's putting into research and design, research and development, design, so forth, machinery, all the money that is spent, and let's say the company spent a total of $115,200,000. The company has a target rate of return on investment of 15% of that investment. So what is 15% of this invested capital of $115,200,000? Well, my target annual operating income then is going to be $17,280,000. That's what I want total. Now, if we go back to our illustration that we learned before and the facts of the circumstance we learned before, the pro value too should increase sales from 150,000 units to 200,000 units. So in this case, I can figure out what is my target operating income per unit by taking this total annual operating income of $17,280,000 and dividing it by the anticipated number of units I'm going to sell, and that will give me my target operating income per unit, or this is going to be my markup component that we looked at up here. So again, this is a markup component of 12%. This is 12% of this cost here. However, do not confuse the rate of return on investment, which we calculate as a percentage of the total invested capital. The target rate of return on investment, 15%. Do not confuse that with the markup component. So, and then let's look at alternative cost plus methods, since we did mention those. We may want, let's say a variable manufacturing costs, direct materials, direct labor, and variable manufacturing overhead. Let's say those costs were $475. And we want a markup percentage of 65%. So 65% of $475, my markup is going to be $308.75. So then what is my cost going to be? It's going to be the cost per unit times my markup component, which is 60. So it's my cost per unit. Add to that 65% of that cost, and my selling price will be $783.75. What about my variable cost of the product? And so that's not only my variable manufacturing cost, but my variable selling and administrative cost. What if that cost was $547 and we decide we want a markup component based on however it is of 45%? So adding my $547, adding to that 45% of that cost, my markup component is going to be $246.15. So my prospective selling price is going to be $793.15. And then we can base that also on full manufacturing costs, direct materials, direct labor, variable, and fixed manufacturing overhead. And we can also compute that on the full cost of the product, like we did up here, of $720. So those are alternative ways we can use for the cost plus method. So the cost plus method is pretty straightforward. We take our cost base, whatever it is. In our case, it was a full unit cost, but it can be any one of these right here that we choose. Add the markup component to it, and that will give us our selling price. Now, let's go back here. Now, many managers will use the full cost of their cost-based pricing for cost-based pricing decisions. Why? Because it allows for a full recovery of all costs of the product. And this is because we incur costs not just in the manufacturing part of the value chain, but we also incur research and development, design. We also incur marketing costs. We incur distribution costs, and we also incur customer service costs. Another thing we use is for price stability, because what happens if the cost of one particular type of cost goes up or down and keeps fluctuating? This, using the full cost of the product and using an overall cost, to allow for price stability. And plus, It's really easy. It's a simple approach. So the selling prices computed under cost plus pricing are prospective pricing, whereas target pricing approach reduces the need to go back and forth among prospective cost plus prices, customer reactions, design modifications, and so forth. So target pricing reduces the need to go back and forth and re-examine our prospective selling prices, which is a weakness of the cost plus pricing. However, if we can take advantage of that cost plus pricing, we should. But that will also require having to look at our customers, what's their reactions to not only our changes, to our design modifications, to the products in themselves, and then get feedback from them. Now, target pricing will first determine product characteristics and then the target price based on the customer's preference and expected competitor responses, and then computes the target cost. So we take the target pricing first. We figure out what kind of characteristics, what features do we want on our product, and then we figure out our target cost based on what that target price is. From that target price, we subtract out the desired operating income per unit or profit per unit, however you want to call it, and then we get a target cost where we have to meet. So whereas target pricing first determines the product characteristics, cost plus pricing says, okay, we've got this. Here's what we can do to increase our selling prices. What features do we need to add, remove, and so forth. So let's be some going back and forth. Now, when we talk about the full product cost, we're talking about really we have to focus on a multiple year product life cycle. So this is what we're talking about when we talk about life cycle product budgeting and costing. Now, so what do I mean by product life cycle? Well, product life cycle is the span of time from when we first start research and development on a product to when the customer service and support are no longer offered on that product. Think of Windows 10, or not Windows 10, but what was that? Windows XP. It was a very long life cycle span. One of the most popular Windows products, probably still the most popular, even though it's no longer supported by Microsoft. When did that life cycle cost come into play? When they first started developing Windows XP to the time where they no longer offered support of that product. That's the product life cycle. Now, the product may still be used by customers, but the company is no longer, Microsoft is no longer supporting that. So they're not spending any more money on that. So the product life cycle span is any time we spend money from the initial research and development on a product to when we no longer provide customer service and support. So when we're no longer paying for anything on that, regarding that product, once we're no longer incurring any more costs for that product, that is when our product life cycle ends. Now, life cycle budgeting, managers are going to estimate the revenues and business function costs across the entire value chain from its initial R&D to its final customer service and support. So we're going to estimate, so in estimating revenues, we're going to estimate revenues total revenues of that product over how many every years we're going to support that product. Life cycle costs are going to be all the costs incurred from the very beginning to where we no longer incur costs because we are no longer supporting that product. Again, that product may still be used by customers, but we are not going to support that product anymore and incur any more costs. So what happens with life cycle costing? It tracks and accumulates costs among business functions across the entire value chain, from the initial R&D to its final customer service and support. And this is going to span several years. This will span 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 12 years, whatever it is. Most companies are going to use this to some degree with their products. I mean, think of General Motors. They had the Trailblazer For a long time, they supported the Trailblazer, and when they first thought of the Trailblazer, to the last time where they no longer are going to incur any costs associated with that. When the warranties have all run out, there's no more costs incurred, their life cycle is done with that. It doesn't mean they won't incur costs to fix it, but warranties will run out. So the customer will have to pay the cost for replacing parts, fixing things in the Trailblazer, whereas the company themselves will no longer have to do that because they'll no longer offer warranty support. So budget lifecycle costs is going to provide useful information so we can strategically evaluate pricing decisions. Because we have to remember that when we incur costs, development period for R&D design is long and costly. And remember, a lot of those costs are locked in at the research and development and design stages. Even if those design costs and the research and development costs are small, compared to all the other costs, a lot of those future costs that have not been incurred yet are going to be fixed. They're going to be locked in. They're going to, when I say fixed, I mean they're locked in. There's no way to avoid those costs anymore. So many costs are locked in the R&D and design stages, even if those respective costs are small. So we have to take a look at those costs because that are incurred in those earlier stages of development, because they are going to affect the product costs and the total cost of the product from beginning to end, over how many every years that is going to be. Now, another thing that we look for in cost management is managing environmental costs. We want to leave less of a carbon footprint. We want to apply value engineering. We want to apply life cycle costing, but we also want to manage our impact on the environment and environmental costs. Now, environmental costs are going to be incurred over several years of the product's life cycle and often locked in the product and process design stages, just like that. But companies are now focusing more and more on the environmental impact of their products on the earth and on the planet as a whole. And there is a new board or a new organization, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and they're defining and they're in the process of defining standards for environmental, social, and governance performance for different industries. People that have the higher ESG ratings have higher future profitability and financial performance. Maybe it's because of customer loyalty and satisfaction. It can be employee engagement, brand, reputation. I'm sure they are all a part of that. So let's take a look here and let's go to that website here. And here is the website here. And you can get a lot of different information on here. And let's talk about standards. Let's just go to standards here for a moment. And we can actually download standards. And we can download standards by greenhouse gas emissions, human capital bulletin. There's some informational supplements. We can actually find the industry that we're in, and let's say consumer goods. And then we can further narrow that down to different types of consumer goods, whether it's appliance manufacturing, e-commerce, building products and furnishings, toys and sporting goods, and so forth, and find out what the standards are for that particular industry. So I just thought I'd show that to you, so that way you can see that, and you can actually, I would encourage you to actually go there and really look at the website, take some time, play around with it, look at different industries or different areas of commerce that you find appealing, that you find you're interested in, and take a look at that. So let's go back here. Now, customer lifecycle cost focuses on the total cost incurred by a customer to acquire, use, maintain, dispose of a product or services. So the lifecycle costing is not just for the manufacturer, but the customer will have his own life cycle costs. What is that cost incurred by the customer? What's the customer life cycle cost? The cost incurred to acquire it, and not just acquire it, but use it, maintain it, keep the upkeep and dispose of a product or service. Think of the Trailblazer we just talked about. GM made the Trailblazer, so we talked about the life cycle costing from the beginning when they first started thinking about that Trailblazer and started incurring costs designing that thing and researching it, all the way up to when that last warranty ended and they no longer had to provide warranty service. So their costs, any costs they absorbed, were complete. The customer's perspective, from a customer's perspective, the customer also has a life cycle cost. That cost to acquire the Trailblazer, the cost to use the Trailblazer, and what cost do we use? Well, we have to put gas in it. And with newer vehicles, the cost of electrical, charging in electricity stations, the cost to maintain it, preventative maintenance, changing the brake pads, changing the air filter, changing oil, any major repairs and expenses as well. Let's say we blow the engine or we need a new transmission, things like that to maintain it. And then finally, disposing of a product or service is when we get rid of that asset. So as a business, we may be having a life cycle for beginning to end of costs we're incurring in providing a product or service, but we're also a customer, and we have to focus on our customer's perspective and what it costs to acquire, use, maintain, dispose of. The lower the cost, then the company can probably charge a little bit higher premium for their product. And like Maytag, they can charge higher prices for appliances. Why? Because it's cheaper to use, it's more cost efficient to use, maintain, low maintenance costs. So therefore, Maytag can charge a higher price for some of its appliances. What are some non-cost factors in pricing decisions? Well, we have to talk about price discrimination, and that's the practice of charging different customers different prices for the same product or service. Now, there are some legal implications to this, so let's take a look at the book here. And we're going to get out of this, and let's go back to the book here, because I want to focus on a couple things here. And price discrimination, we talked about that, and the book gives an illustration of an airline company. Airline companies have two basic different types of client base: business customers and retail customers. Business customers, they have to get from point A to point B. They can't play around. If they're traveling for business, business has got to be done. So therefore, their prices are going to be a little less elastic, or there's going to be a little less. There's going to be a higher degree of insensitivity to demand, to price change. So airlines will charge higher prices to business travelers because they know they have to get from point A to point B. It's not optional. Whereas pleasure travelers, they don't need to go to the airport. And so when prices of airline tickets go up, typically they see demand comes down a little bit. And then lower prices typically stimulate demand, while higher prices restrict demand. So for the pleasure travelers, there is price elasticity or price sensitivity to the price changes. Whereas with business customers, there may not be as much of that. And a lot of times I would say there probably isn't. But if prices go too crazy, and the airlines know this, then they will lose business, and then at some point there will be some elasticity, but within a band of range, at certain price levels, a little bit of a change up, won't really affect demand. So now, what happens if business travelers become more sensitive to price? Then at that point, let's say the financial crisis, or let's say a pandemic, or let's say something else. If there is a change in demand or a change in sensitivity to prices, then at some point we will need to reduce prices if we are an airline company and we want to get business customers flying on our airline. Peak load pricing is charging a higher price for the same product or service when demand approaches a physical limit of capacity. Let's say, for example, we're in a hotel, the Summer Olympics in Rio de Janeiro. You can think of this situation maybe if you live in a city that has an all-star baseball game or the NBA all-star game or whatever. A special event that's going to bring everybody to your city. What's going to happen is that the hotels are going to sell out, rental cars are going to sell out, and if there's only a limited supply of hotel rooms. It's not like you can just pop up and have a hotel, put up in the next 2 weeks. So hotel rooms are going to be limited. If there's a huge demand, then prices will go up that way companies can make additional operating income based on that demand, that peak load pricing, where they're charging a higher price for the same product or service. You see this a lot in the hotel industry, as a matter of fact. Go to a resort destination when it's not, quote unquote, in season. Then prices will be down. Whereas if everyone's on spring break and you're going to the hottest place there is for spring break, then prices are going to be up because they know they can capitalize because there's going to be so many people there and not enough rooms. And when we talk about international pricing, there's going to be some other situations as well with that. And with that, you're going to have difference in the purchasing power of consumers in different countries. You're also going to have exchange rates. You're also going to have government restrictions that may limit prices that companies can charge. In fact, you do see price controls in a number of different countries rather. So there can be some international price differences as well. And a lot of times this will be tied to maybe the value of the dollar or the value of a local currency in relationship to the dollar and so forth. So, and then also government restrictions. Those are probably the two biggest things. Now, when we talk about considerations affecting pricing decisions, two key features of pricing discrimination laws are: one, discrimination is permissible if differences in prices can be justified by differences in cost. And the basic essence of price discrimination being illegal is only if its intent is to lessen or prevent competition. Other types of things, we can have predatory pricing, the appropriate measurement of costs, dumping, for a number of years in the past. Haven't heard as much about it lately, but dumping is when China sold steel produced in China was sold in the United States at a cost lower than what it was cost to make in China. So, and they were just dumping their stuff here and ruining the steel industry here in the United States. Was that the only issue with steel? No, it wasn't, but that was certainly a big influence. And then we have collusive pricing, where we have managers from different companies or different companies themselves agreeing to, for lack of a better term, price fix. Keep the pricing of a product or service at a particular mark, and everyone agrees on a specific price. So then they won't. So then that way there'll be no winners, no losers. Everybody will share in the good fortune, so forth and so forth. So with that is collusive pricing. So, okay, that is the end of this session. My name is Leroy Meadows. I want to thank you for joining me. Have a good day.